We know the pain out there. We already know. Turn on the news. We know that there's drama and trauma out there. But can we create, just for a moment, an hour or two, some loving kindness where we get to experience that and we can lock it into the body? I know what it's like to be with strangers and feel brave.
Welcome to the Common Good Podcast, a conversation about the significance of place, eliminating economic isolation, and the structure of belonging. This is Joey Taylor, the producer of the podcast, and for this week's episode, we continue a live podcast series with the Hive about collective change. So if you haven't listened to last week's conversation with Leslie Hirschberger, it's probably best to press pause and come back to this episode after you've listened to that conversation. In this series, we're talking to the Hive's 6 core faculty members, all of whom have a unique perspective on navigating collective change. These live experiences, either in person at the Hive or on Zoom, run for about 2 hours and contain more than what you'll listen to for the next hour. So we'd love for you to join us. You can find the registration link in the show notes. For this conversation, Leslie Hirschberger and I speak to Daniel Hughes about anger, navigating self-interest, what it looks like to practice loving kindness in social settings, and how to discover what you really want. Daniel is a gifted speaker, poet, leadership coach, and a community organizer. As we begin, Leslie uses the framework of the Enneagram to ask Daniel about anger.
I got to know Daniel through the Enneagram land. And it's interesting we're talking about anger because 8s are one of the anger types in the anger triad. And from the Enneagram perspective, the 8s tend to express anger openly. 9s numb it, 1s contain it. Your type structure tends to express it directly. So what's so interesting is that the last time we were all together, it was kind of a cliffhanger because somebody asked about anger and we talked about anger right at the end. And it was a subject I felt like we could have given a lot more time to. So Daniel, is the role of anger in providing the energy to kind of get ourselves up and out to create collective change? How has that showed up for you?
I'm thinking of your comment about the 9. So when I first kind of came around the Hive, I thought I was a 9. And I think the anger was there, but I was trying to control it. I was conditioned to, as a Black man in society, I wasn't free to express it. As I started to get into some social justice work here, specifically racial justice work, I couldn't contain it. There was a lot of anger there that I didn't know what to do with. And when I first got into the social justice work around Cincinnati, it was like, yeah, the anger is what you need. Tap into that. What makes you angry? And I started to realize that, like, it's not good for me to remain angry. I don't know if I can sustain it and do the work. Like, it can get me going. I don't know if I can sustain it. And if I do, it's going to be very destructive. I could feel it. I could feel where my mind was going, where my inclinations. And it was like, I want to destroy stuff. Like, I want to tear stuff down. And then I started to think about, so what happens if we destroy it all? And then we have to rebuild it. How do we do that? Who's going to do that? And so the anger is a catalyst for me. When I feel it, I know I'm alive. I'm in the room. I'm present. Because my coping mechanism is to ignore everything. That's how, as a person of color who has experienced certain kinds of injustice, I have to ignore it, I have to downplay it. And so when I feel it now, it's like, okay, there's the tension. That's that choice point. What are we going to do? Do we give in to the anger? Do we deny it? Do we pretend that it's not there? Or do we have a conversation? I would say now is the facts, the emotions, and then the wisdom to make the choice that I want to make. That's what I would say today. I didn't know that back when it was happening, because it was happening in real time. And so anger's kind of on the move. I'm very comfortable with it. I'm very comfortable when people have it and they show it. That makes sense to me. It's hard for me to trust people who don't have anger, who don't show it, express it. I'm like, I don't know about that.
And I'm thinking the Enneagram too. It's just like, now you're here, you showed up, you're in the building. But was there a specific turning point where you started to say, this is not good? From the standpoint that if it's expressed in this certain way, I can cause destruction in the field. What was it that precipitated?
I don't know if it was one thing. I think it was a series of police brutality, actually, because police brutality in Lima is what got me into, like, that's what I was awakened to around social justice. Black women killed by the police. I'm awake now. I'm engaged. Come down to Cincinnati. Sam DuBose gets shot and killed by another police officer. And it just kept happening. And I'm like, there's no way I can, like, I'm angry. And this, after a while, I was like, I can't even produce it. Like, I can't even get angry about this anymore. And so it was like, so what do we do? And then other people were expressing anger. But in terms of myself and then other folks in justice work, and specifically people of color, it was just like, we're just tired. And I think that's where it was like, anger's not enough. I mean, because you could see, right? You could see people were looting, and there was a question of, do you deface property? It was like, well, someone was killed, so people are going to express that, right?
So the anger's in their bodies, that feeling of I got to do
I
something.
got to do something.
Yeah. But you've talked a little bit more about this notion of loving kindness and mercy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're thinking about collective change and courageous conversations, how do you bridge from that anger to that space of loving kindness and mercy?
I had a real experience here at the Hive. So like I said, when Sam DuBose was shot and killed, I was taken back to 2008 in Lima, where I had all this unprocessed anger that came flooding back here when 2016 or something like that. And I was talking with Troy, the former Hive director, and he was doing some work he was doing some somatic work with one of the local churches and people in returning citizens. And so those are all kinds of things that matter to me. So he invited me to one of his sessions. And so as an 8, I show up to experience it. My body needs to experience it, right? And I'm there to observe. And next thing I know, I'm singing like a canary. I'm just like telling my business. I'm like, whoa, what kind of voodoo magic is this? Because this is weird. It released. It was like, there was yoga, there was mindfulness, there was trauma informed, and we were in circle. And I had never experienced all of that. And it was like, whoa, this is powerful. And then we started the Courage to Connect, where we started to bring people into this space to have courageous dialogue around the racial tension and trauma. And then that led to the inner work of racial justice, because I was so focused on the external collective and not realizing that I had all this unprocessed internal racial trauma, inferiority, suppression. I thought you could do that work without this work. And so around that time, I was also talking about, I'm leaving the plantation of whiteness. I knew that where I was powerless over it. I could not change white supremacy. I could not change how I was responding to it, because I was an assimilator. If I had a code switch, all the things that I did to cope with white supremacy, I'm like, I'm leaving this plantation. I'm out. And that was my honest response. I was being honest with myself for the first time, that this is not okay with me. Not the world. Like, if white supremacy is okay with some or not, it didn't matter. I had to get honest with myself. This is not okay with me. And so then it was like, but I don't know how to live outside of white supremacy. Even as a Black-bodied individual, I don't know how. I don't know my place. And so I say that it took faith, hope, and love to leave the plantation. And I thought that freedom would be like just the greatest thing. And it was like, no, that journey it's not, right? It's costly, it's unsettling, it's messy, because everything I thought I knew, I could no longer hold on to. And the world that I was wanting to create and who I wanted to be, I had no model for it. And that gets to why I think transformation should happen in relationship and in community. Because otherwise you can get lost in the wilderness trying to figure it out. Because I think you do need others to reflect what it is that they see in you, what you see in them. And we're struggling honestly about what's really there. And then the openness to, like, I think there could be another way.
What's so moving to me about this, Daniel, I mean, amongst so many things, is this notion that it has to be done in community. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're from such an individualistic culture. You know, therapy happens in private. Everything's private. It's just me. I got to do this myself. And it's actually been through groups like I did Courage to Connect with Daniel and Troy. We started right before George Floyd was murdered. And to see myself with someone else, that group change, that collective work is so different from the individual work. And it's scary. It's scary. I sat there. I remember being in the group, and there were Black people in the group, white people in the group, and I felt frozen. I didn't know what to say, what to do. And the space that you held was just sturdy. It was really, really sturdy. And I didn't feel like if I say something now, I'm going to mess up, and that there was actually space for that. And I'm wondering, what enabled you to do that? I mean, that was such a traumatic time. And I'm thinking about your notion, again, the loving kindness and mercy. I mean, what enabled you to do that at that time?
I remember a day when I was sharing something and Troy just stopped the group. He was like, okay, everyone, I want you to check in. How does that hit your body? And it just blew me away, because I never imagined that anything that I was saying when I was talking my truth could actually impact someone physically. Like, I feel that I do, but I didn't know that anyone else did, because it was just my reality. And that's when I realized that, one, I could trust the space, and we were intent on creating brave space. And I'm like, I need this, because I don't know how to show up in the world bravely. And we were doing it. It wasn't perfect. It was just our intention, our desire. So we started to do it. And then as we did it, I realized that this is what I believe practicing loving kindness is. So there's a scripture that talks about do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. And we were doing that. And I'm like, I want more spaces like this where people frozen, fearful, angry, we can practice loving kindness, mercy together and start to put that out into the world. Yeah.
Well, you're saying something that so many facilitators know is that we're learning along the way too. And I am from the generation of the sage on the stage model, where you're supposed to know everything. You're supposed to get up there and know everything. And it has been the Hive and experiences like we had encouraged to connect is that we're walking each other home, where we're walking this with each other. So there's a conversation that I have so much energy around, and I think you and I've touched on it a little bit. And that is that right now, so many people are either cutting each other off or finding ways to just to not have conversations. It's like people are saying it's too much. I can't do it. It's just too much. And the way we're communicating is through text and email and maybe some sort of asynchronous communication like Voxer or Marco Polo or something like that. And we're not with each other embodied. What do you have to say about these times? It's a really big question.
Yeah.
But what do you have to say about these times, Daniel, around this way we're not having the courageous conversations, even in our most close interpersonal relationships?
The first thought was, if I ask you, how do you feel about conflict? What do you notice in your body? Think about a person or a situation, a relationship that you care about, professional, personal, intimate, and think about a conflict there. What shows up? And I think that our personal, our authentic orientation to conflict, we have to contend with that. Like, you got to start there.
One of those conditioned tendencies that live in the body.
You have to start there. Because for me, if I can't blow it up, I'm going to avoid. I'll isolate, I'll run away. And if I can't run away, then I'll confront or whatever. And so
when you say that, I'll run away and then I'll confront. Can you say a little bit more about that? I confront.
Yeah. So I was in first grade. No, I was 5 years old in kindergarten. That's the time. So two fifth graders went into a bar. So I'm going to school for the first time. I'm riding the bus. I'm so excited. I'm the youngest of four. And so I'm going to the big kids floor. My brother's like 4 years older than me. So the kindergartners are on the bottom, and then his grade, they were at the high. So I'm walking in with him. He's going upstairs, like, go upstairs. One of his buddies kind of bullies me and tries to scare me, right? And tells me that I didn't belong there. And so I don't know what came out of me. I pushed him into the locker and immediately ran all the way down to the bottom floor into my kindergarten class. I got in trouble with my teacher because I was running in the halls. And I remember thinking just recently, I'm like, but she didn't know I was running for my life. And that's what life has felt like for me, is that I would much rather avoid the conflict. If I can't, that fight is there. It's there. And I've done a lot to not fight. I was conditioned to not fight, not to intimidate. Don't make them feel afraid. So that's where the running, because I don't know what else to do, because I'm going to confront it.
Yeah. And then you have the Christian overlay and the teachings get distorted.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get to the real. It doesn't
get to what's real.
This is problematic, or I'm problematic, or there's something here that I'm not okay with. And I don't know if we have the muscles or the practices, or even that we've created the conditions where that's okay to do that in community. Right?
And so much of what we're doing here is, this is what I feel like so often here, is that you said something that's so important, is it's about practice.
Yes.
We are learning this. I mean, every time we get together, we're learning it. And I think there's this ideal culturally that it's got to be perfect. We got to shine it up back there before we show up. And I love this notion of practice, not perfection. Just practice it.
Yes.
And get it good enough, get good enough connection. And then I learn something from that. And then I can go and feel in my body. And so talk about the heart. Can you talk a little about this? We've talked about, your body. Can you talk a little bit about the heart?
What do you want to know about the heart? So I had to spend a year on focusing on my heart. It just was not, I could not hear it. I had ignored the heart for so long. It was like an inconvenience. I knew anger, fear, sadness, maybe a little bit of happiness, but that was just rare. And so the heart is a beautiful thing living from there. But I'll say this, I don't know how people who are heart types, I don't know how they get through a day. When I gave myself to the heart, like there was so much pain. As an 8, I feel it. I just want to get away from it because I want to fight. And so when I gave into the heart, it was like, oh my God, it was really depressing. And had I not had relationships around to kind of just check in, I would have died in that state. Like, I don't know, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, but I felt like I can't get out. The heart was just so heavy, but I did make it out. And I do appreciate heart types in the heart, but like my heart, it's not like stable. It wants to feel good. So it's going to jump to whatever feels good. It doesn't want to sit in that. Mine doesn't want to sit there.
Well, I want to say, just because we teach the Enneagram here too, so we're having a little intersection, which is a little bit how we're going to be working over the next couple of years. Is heart types don't always feel their hearts either. It's not exclusive. I think we all have a heart. And I will say, for my experience of 8s and what you're describing, we have the racial overlay and Christian overlay. There's so many other things that shape us, not just our Enneagram type or family of origin. And you feel things, my experience of 8s is you feel things so strongly in the body that it feels like overwhelm. And so not opening to the heart's like kind of a good idea for a while. It's a protective adaptation. And what you're speaking to is the vulnerability of this work and the importance of supportive community. To try to go it alone, like you said, it was like the community that helped you through these times. To try to go it alone, it's not a good idea. It's sometimes your protective adaptation of armoring the heart is a good thing. So if you're creating a courageous conversation and I'm coming to a class of yours or something like that, what am I going to see?
One, this is going to be rooted in brave space. That is the intention. The intention is to live into that. And over the last couple of years, we're talking about what has changed. I do feel like I created brave space within, like truly within. When the fear shows up, it has a place. I'm not avoiding it. When anger shows up, it has a place. I'm not trying to project. When shame shows up, I invite it to tea. And before, none of those could have any place. And so hopefully when you're coming to the class, you know that you can show up in your authentic self, and that we're going to co-create whatever it is that we're going to do. We're creating that together in real time, and we'll never be able to recreate that. So the invitation is to show up in your fullness, show up however you need to show up. And we can talk about the agenda, but that's the invitation, is to show up in your true and authentic self. And we hold space for one another and move at the speed of trust and love.
Well, I will say that as somebody who took your class, that was the experience. It was the sense that you could show up. It wasn't like you were the grand guru showing us how to do it. You were in us together, but it felt like brave space. There was a sturdy enough container to show up. And that's what it feels like with your type structure. It just feels sturdy when you show up and the heart is open. And there's something too, you and I were just talking about too, with the somatic piece. And for those of you who are hearing this for the first time, soma is the living organism. It's the body, but it's alive. It's not just a mechanistic thing. It's alive. And we work a lot here at the Hive with somatic awareness. But there's something important to know. People will say the body doesn't lie. And that's true. The body doesn't lie about your personal experience. But Daniel and I were talking that some people are conditioned to walk down the street and their body will tell them, based on cultural conditioning, to be afraid of you. So there's another piece called somatic opening, that I can be aware that that's my conditioned tendencies that live in my body, and I can open to something different. So when I can open and maybe 10% open, and I almost feel like that's what you did with your heart. It's like 10% opening. I'm going to give this a try. Okay, it's safe here. There's a support group, right? Or there's a support mirroring. And then somatic practice. This isn't like one and done.
No.
This is such a core piece of this Hive work, is practice.
Because change is constant. We don't have to do anything. Change is happening. The weather will be different when we go home. It'll be different in the morning. It just is. But can change be transformative? And that's where the practice and what we practice and how we practice matters, because then we can transform change into something that is beneficial, which I would call co-creating. We co-create the world. And to me, that's in living color. That's in real time. We have a game plan, but life gets lifey. It just doesn't matter the plan. And then you have to adapt. You have to pivot. And so let's practice that in a loving kindness and mercy. because we're going to go out there and we're going to experience, like, we know the pain out there. We already know. Turn on the news. We know that there's drama and trauma out there, but can we create just for a moment, an hour or two, some loving kindness where we get to experience that and we can lock it into the body? I know what it's like to be with strangers and feel brave. I know what it's like to say the thing that I think is the wrong thing and folk didn't respond and didn't judge me, didn't kill me. We have to practice that because otherwise it's just an intellectual. And I spent the bulk of my earlier life here. I could read about it. I could study it. I could research it, but I damn sure was not going to test my body with it because the fear kept me in check. So yeah, I think we have to practice it.
So it's almost like a lot of times we think of practice, and practice can feel so individualistic. What you're really speaking to is relational practice.
Yes.
Like you can't stay home on this safe iPhone texting your people, right?
That's right. That's right.
And then like your practice is so radically relational.
And we have to push against the coronavirus effect, which said socially distant. We should have been physically distant, but never socially distant. We've been reprogrammed. So it takes a little more effort to push against that, to work through that limiting story, because that's a limiting story at this point. And we feel very comfortable just disconnecting. I do. I felt awkward trying to re-engage in social settings after we were separated for so long. So I think we have to be radically relational.
At this point in the conversation, participants were placed into small groups with the following prompt. What's showing up for you right now? What has your attention? What are you observing? Not in terms of what's being said in the conversation, but instead, what are you feeling? What does your body see? As you consider these questions for yourself, listen in as Daniel grounds us and then shares a poem.
We're going to do a little grounding, so welcome everyone. And if you can, just get as comfortable as you can. Take a moment and think about the day that you've had. Maybe consider how you thought the day would go. Maybe you woke up this morning full of intention and had plans and goals, and maybe it went that way. How did that feel to you? How does it feel now? Perhaps you had no intention and you just got up and got going and you encountered what you encountered. What did you notice now? Maybe think about a conversation that you had that is sticking with you even now, or an encounter that you had that has your attention. And if you feel comfortable, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or at least lower your gaze so you're not distracted. Just notice your breathing. Your breath has been with you your entire life, and especially today, through all the interactions and encounters. That beautiful breath. And I want to draw your attention inward, into your heart, your lovely heart. I want to invite you to just notice if it's open or if it's closed or if it's just kind of indifferent right now. And breathe into your heart space. When you exhale, invite yourself to just open just a little, as much as it is comfortable for you. I invite you to breathe in again to your heart space. Exhale and open just a little bit more. One more deep inhale. Release. Just notice your heart right now. I invite you for the conversation to have your heart as open as possible, just noticing when it moves, whether it closes or opens more. Wherever your energy or intentions are, I want to invite you to, if it's in your head, to bring it to your heart and into your body. And notice that you're really grounded, you're rooted on the ground, your feet are firm, we are stable, and we're going to co-create this moment together. I want to invite you into Brave Space. This is a poem that was written by Beth Strano and adapted here by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. In the work that I do, I often put that out there because that is the intention. As an Enneagram 8, Brave Space is very important to me in showing up in the world. And so here is an invitation to Brave Space. Just notice whatever word or phrase hits you tonight. Together we will create Brave Space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side.
As we return, people from the Hive begin to enter into the conversation, and I began by asking Daniel the question, what's the one story that's getting in the way of the collective living into its birthright? Before answering that question, a Hive member asks what we mean when we say the collective. Here's Daniel.
I think a collective as a process, I think it's individuals who are clear about their self-interest. So everyone in the room has a self-interest. You put your self-interest in the middle of the floor or on the table. We're very clear what you want. And from that, we identify our collective shared interests, shared values. To me, that becomes the collective. It is not a collective just to put a bunch of people together. Yeah, to me, it has to have a sense of agency. There has to be a sense of your self-interest is at the table, and you get to negotiate your self-interest with the group. That process is what creates a collective for me.
When we were imagining this conversation series, we were really particular that we didn't want to talk about individual change, but instead, in the larger world, there is change coming at us at a rate that's never come at us before. So there's that piece. But then there's also this desire for folks here at the Hive, for people who are listening to the podcast, to be agents of change. And so when we were imagining the collective, I think we had a much simpler understanding, which is essentially like, as a we, how do we process the change that's coming at us and be agents of change in the world? And now I love, like, the first step is becoming the collective and being honest about what our self-interests are, to being co-creators and negotiators. I think that makes a ton of sense. Yeah. I'm going to ask you the question again. So what is the one story that's getting in the way of the collective claiming their birthright?
What has come up for me is the quote by Rabbi Hillel. If I'm not for myself, who will be? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And I think the story that we're telling ourselves is either the story of self, story of us, or story of now. So in justice work, now is not the time to overturn injustice. Give it time. So it's never the right time. We're too fragmented. We don't have enough resources to make change. So I'm just me. I can't do it because I'm Black, I'm a female, I'm gay, I'm straight, whatever. I'm wealthy, I'm poor. So I think that the lie shows up. And I think that is what's holding us back, the lie. My individual personal lie, our collective lie, and then I think ultimately our fear of actually doing something now. So maybe the story is fear, but I think there's a limiting story that shows up, and in the room, we buy into it. We go with that, I think.
Here's a question from Shonda. With oppressive systems like capitalism and white supremacy informing how many of us are taught to see ourselves and others, how do you suggest folks identify their self-interest?
Now I'm thinking of Howard Thurman and his question of what do you want really? Because the oppressive systems are there and they'll be there. And they were here before we got here, right? So that's a constant. We're going to always contend with oppression, regardless of who's in power. The question of what do I want really? and sitting with that and answering that authentically. It seems like a simple question, but for me, it totally rocked my world because I built a professional life that was from here. And I'm thinking, this is what I want. I'm on this particular path and I'll work till I retire. And it was like, that's not what I really want. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm performing, but it's not what I really want. And I think that question of what do you want, for me, it hits 5 areas. I call these the spires. I check in every day with my spires. It's, what do I want spiritually? How's my connection to the divine? What do I want physically? How is my physical health, wellness? Am I sleeping? Am I hydrating? This simple stuff. What do I want intellectually, mentally? How's my mental health? What do I want relationally? What do I want emotionally? And what do I want financially? And I need to be aware of that at least every morning, because I'll forget when I wake up. I'll forget those things. And I can get caught up in what you want. And now I'm going along with you. I can get caught up. I could be anywhere. But if I stay rooted in my true, like what I want in those areas, then I think I'm prepared to engage in any conversation and negotiate from my self-interest. And we can define what it is that we want. But I think a lot of inner work.
Yeah. So you're defining these domains. Where do you answer the question from, though? Like, how do you get to the answer to those, to questioning those different domains?
Yeah. So when I said earlier, I think there's the emotional truth. So I have to feel those things. And then there's the factual truth. I got to look at, what am I actually observing? What am I seeing? And then I bring them together for a wise decision. So it's the intellectual mind, the dialectic, right? The emotional truth, intellectual truth, and then the wise truth. And I have to be in dialogue with those things. And that may seem like a lot for people, but for me, the way that I live, the way I am, I have to check in with my heart running through. I got to check in with my body, what's showing up, and I got to check in with my thoughts. Because I have to do that. And it takes me a while to get there. So when I'm in real time, this is why I would avoid a lot of social situations, because I can't do it quickly. I'm not practiced at this yet. And I'll get caught up, and now I'm performing over here and performing there. And so I do think it's a time away. I think it's a time you've got to retreat. And this is hard for Nate, right? Because something happens, we want to go, but you've got to retreat for a while, not forever, get it together, get very clear about your self-interest, and then re-engage. And I don't think that you should compromise on your core. Whatever you identify as your core, you shouldn't compromise that.
And doesn't it feel like too, I mean, because you're an 8, and Shonda, if that was Shonda's question, Shonda's a 2 on the Enneagram, which that's a $24,000 question, is what do I want? What do I need?
Yeah.
But what strikes me too is these conditioned tendencies we internalize. We have these conditioned tendencies that we take in. And we've got to tease those babies out. Like, what is that out there of what someone tells me who I am, which, you know, if it's a relationship and you're telling me who I am, that might be some helpful things to know. So bust my self-deception. But what Shonda was asking about with capitalism, white supremacy, those are some and I'm getting older. I'm 64 now. And I'm noticing that I've got internalized ageism. I'm noticing it. It's in here. That piece has to really get teased out too with some, and I think you're spot on that time alone is so important, like really intentional time alone.
And not judging it. This is the other piece for me, is like, okay, I'm a racist. I'm an American racist. I have a particular brand, maybe different from yours, but I'm a racist. The moment I was able to own that and not try to, no, not me. And it's like, no, I'm American. So all that is in me. Now I got to find the particular brand and type that I have, be very clear about it. So then as I'm engaging with people, I know. You may not know that I'm a racist, but I need to know that I'm a racist so that I can interact with you in a way that's going to be beneficial to the collective. But if I'm judging it and feeling guilty or feeling bad, then that's the energy I'm putting into the room.
Or projecting it onto you.
Yeah.
You know, you're the racist. I'm not acknowledging you're judging me because I'm older. Look at you. Yeah, I can see. Yeah. Yep. But it's my own internalized ageism. Yes. I'm projecting it onto you. We have to really bust our projections, because when you internalize stuff, you see it all out there. And the courage to know that, oh my God, noticing my own ageism.
I think the recovery community is the best place where you start to get it. I think that's where they've got it right. You name it. You name the thing that you are powerless over. You name the thing that you are. And there's no shame or guilt. It's like, yep. And this is our starting point. And we begin to develop the practices and the traditions and the principles and the ways that we will not even just overcome it, but make sense of life and do life in a different way.
It's hard to put the question into words because it's on the edge of what you're talking about. But take capitalism. You're asking yourself, what do I want financially? And you start envisioning whatever, I don't know, one of those $1 million mansions is they're building. How do you get past, or how do you get underneath that to say, how have I been conditioned to think success in this world is money, or I should trust these corporations because that's how I'm going to be successful? You know, I can ask the questions, but I'm blind to a bunch of stuff.
I don't think it's alone. There is the asking the question here, but I think it's also having the bravery to offer it up in community. Because just getting it out, I remember the first time I was in C2C and I'm like, I'm a racist. Saying that in the room, I'm like, this could potentially be really bad, right? Because white folk are in the room, they're like, well, if Daniel's a racist, then it's like, I can't control anything. I don't get to control how you experience it. I had to name it in order for me to start to move beyond it. So instead of trying to fight the fact that we're all capitalists, we are. So it's being able to name that, drop it, and watch how people can hold space for that. You said it was sturdy. That's it. I think there's a lot to just say, let's just put it out there. No one needs to respond. They don't even need to challenge you. If you want a $3 million mansion, that's what you want. That's your self-interest. It's good to know that. You need to know that. What anyone else does with that, that's none of your business.
Because it could go the other way. If we're shooting for an ideal, I'm going to be a good non-capitalist, right? We start to other that when we start to just split it into us, them, blame, shame, all of that kind of thing. One of the things that I like to ask somebody with when I'm working with coaching leaders or something like that, when people say, I want to grow my company, one of the things I'll say is why? Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of people grow their company and it creates a host of problems to sell it, and then they sell it and they're miserable. And I've seen it so often. So sometimes it's almost looking at like, what are the patterns, say, of capital? Because capitalism was born out of, in some sense, oppression, where people were forced to, under the king, to be with a collective. I had to always be with the, I had to do what the collective said. I'm an individual. I'm going to make something for myself. And when we know that every system is emerging out of something else, then it starts to get kind of locked in. And I think from when we look at capitalism, I think we have to talk about, are there aspects of it that we appreciate? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are there aspects of capitalism that I don't want anymore? And I don't want to just like flow along with it. We have to get real clear on what that means to us and what are the patterns of it, and ask people. And that's what happens in a sturdy space. You could share your experience of it, because I'm here to tell you, when working with immigrants, sometimes they will say, hey, this is better. So I think we have to not reduce it to this one thing. That's what can get us in trouble as a collective.
I also think there's something there. Like if you're checking in with yourself on a daily basis, you're giving it to the collective and saying, here's my self-interest. That doesn't mean that your self-interest is static. You engage in the collective, you continue to check in with yourself, you continue to get feedback, whatever that looks like. Well, it's going to evolve. It's going to emerge. It's going to continue to shift. So it's not a once and for all. Maybe you want a $3 million mansion today, but in a year of cultivating these spaces where you practice mercy in social settings, maybe it's different then. Right. You know,
And I like to be honest with ourselves, like that part of us that, that's kind of cool, right? And just be honest and then slow. And what really matters to me. And I agree, it evolves. It's not static. Every system emerged out of something else, sometimes as a correction.
I think I have a couple different questions. One has to do with socialization, but you both mentioned that with the Enneagram, labeling yourself incorrectly, and that a lot of people go through that process where they're labeling as a peacemaker or a helper. And then I've actually read that 6s are overrepresented in our current population, basically based on trauma, that there's just more people that identify with that fear center. So I'm wondering about misidentification with the Enneagram, and how did you misidentify yourself? And then I am a mental person. I'm all up in my head. And so I know how to describe what it is to live from that space. I'm curious how someone who is a heart-centered person, how would they describe their experience? Because I don't know how to define what the heart is. I know how everybody would define it differently. We were talking about that in our group, but so misidentification of the Enneagram, and then how, maybe if you're a heart person, what does that feel like that's different than a head person?
So I want both of us to answer that, because I think you're asking a number of questions. One is that just like with anything, it takes us a while to get there, right? And you said something really important around social conditioning, that Daniel spoke into social conditioning. I told Daniel, I've got to go home and process what he has just shared about his eightness and how being a Black man really impacted how that showed up, which I've heard from particularly women who identify as eights. I have my own sense around this thing around sixes. I think it's a theory. We haven't counted. We don't know this for sure. What I'll say is this, is that there's tends to be generationally, and people always said that the United States was a very three-ish culture. It's a high performer culture, right? This would be back to our capitalism question. It's kind of your classic, you work hard, individual, shoot for the top, that kind of thing. You saw that more in boomers and Gen X. I was talking with a friend who wrote a book on the Enneagram, and they said that they see their generation, millennial, Gen Z, is more of a six-ish generation because of the conditions, right? 9/11. I mean, all of these conditions that created a lot more fear in the field. So I think that we can have these internalize these energies of the types inside our own bodies. The other thing, raise your hand if you were taught to pay attention to the body center of intelligence. I talked about this last week. You weren't. So we don't have any kind of conditioning around paying attention to the body center. We were taught in the mental triad. That's how education, for the most part, with the exception of schools perhaps like Waldorf or Montessori, are taught through the mental center, the intellectual center. So we're all in our heads. And Western civilization was built on the rational head center. So it's this notion of the heart, and we talked about this last week, and that's not as much our subject today, but the notion of the heart is there's the heart types. It's not that they're always in their heart. They're tuning into the room from that center, that emotional center, to get a sense of the room in order to get a connection. But what I'm interested in, based on your question of this mistyping thing that happens, I'm just really curious, Daniel talking about, because when I first heard about you, Troy told me about you, said that you were a 9. Mm-hmm. And then I met you, and I wasn't so sure because energetically you didn't feel mergy like the 9s do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I wasn't familiar with the Enneagram until I came around the Hive and folks who were like talking about these numbers. I had no interest in knowing about a number. Didn't really matter to me. And so I think I took one of the free tests and it said I was a 9, and everyone went with that. And so I'm like, okay, I'm a 9. But I remember there were songs for each number. And I remember wanting to be the 8. Like I'm hearing this song and I'm like, yes. I'll shake the ground with all my might, and I will pour my whole heart up to the surface. I want to be an 8. When I was hearing the description about 8, I was like, man, I wish I was an 8, but I'm a 9. And I'm like, damn it, I can't even fight. Like 9s didn't seem like they wanted to fight. I was trying to live into it. But the thing about the 9 in the song was, I think there's a line where he says, I've been less than half myself for more than half my life, or something like that. I've been less than half myself for more than half my life. And I'm like, I feel that. I feel like I've been living with one hand tied behind my back. I wasn't really allowed to show up. I got in a lot of trouble in school being direct and expressive. Considered hyperactive. I was busy. I was always being punished. And so when I was growing up, you can get paddled still at school. So I was getting paddled. So there was a lot of like, this isn't cool. Whatever I am is not okay. And so that happened very early on. And so I don't know why 9, but I could do that really well. I think growing up early on, I was very much in my body, and then I gravitated to sports. That was the appropriate way to express all that energy I had. And so that was my teacher. And then when I went off to college and encountered golf, I realized that I couldn't muscle my way through everything. There was something else. And so I went and leaned in very heavily into the headspace and was very good at it, just like I was in sports. And then that wasn't enough. There was still something for me that was missing. And I hear about the hearts, and I'm trying to listen to this stuff, and I just decided I would give it a year and see. And I think that's when getting in touch with my heart, even though it was really kind of awkward, allowed me to kind of rest in, like, I really was an 8 all along. And I've been trying to figure out how to survive.
There's a book called Enneagram of Black Liberation. And she really addresses some of these conditioned pieces. When you walked into my office for a typing interview, I didn't sense 9, right? 8s, I sometimes feel guilty for ever charging them for their typing interview.
obvious.
They walk in and, but it was different because, a corporate 8 will just walk in my office and sit in the waiting room sometimes and just kind of walks on in and takes up the whole chair. But you as a Black man knew not to do that. That's conditioning. But when he came in energetically, it's big. I felt big energy filling the room, even in the silence. How I feel about my son-in-law. He's a quieter person, but I feel his energy fills the 8s, and the energetic is called excess. And so typically 8s' children do get in trouble because it's a lot of excess, and they find ways to channel it often through sports, but not always. Art, creativity, music, whatever. But it's trying to it's a lot of energy. There's so many layers. So we talked about this last week, and I can't overemphasize this, is that we are shaped. Your whole entire sharing today, Daniel, is so much about your shaping, that every single one of us is shaped. So it's not always tight. We're always interacting. The world is shaping us, and then we're reshaping the world. And I think that's what we're doing here. The world shapes us, and then we're just little by little reshaping it when we go back out there.
So this is Jennifer. I have a question around, since you work a lot in organizing space, how cultural conditioning kind of shows up. And I'm asking that question out of an experience of trying to find belonging in a Black Lives Matter movement, showing up to a Free Palestine protest, feeling like I'm white. Let me stand in the back. I'll hold my sign and I'm here, but I don't deserve to be in the front or even in the middle. And I notice when I'm in those spaces how that's showing up for me. It doesn't feel necessarily wrong, but it feels uncomfortable. So I'm interested if you could talk a little bit about that. And as a follow-up, where do we energetically need to get to in an organizing space? And what's the work goes in to get there, and maybe confronting some of that conditioning as part of it?
So I don't think that that's bad. I think that that's the
Right.
the discomfort. The cultural piece has shown up in different ways. Sometimes it's showing up with the people who are funding the movement. Like, I don't think that you can talk about these movements as just being grassroots. They're funded by power, and that makes it complicated. It's not pure. So if you're looking for something that's authentic and pure that you can just jump in and negotiate your self-interest and all that, I don't know if that exists currently. And so culturally, it shows up in, there's still white supremacy. There are people who have the money and want certain things done. And so the people of color are mobilized for that. It's not really organizing. There's more mobilization happening than actual organizing and seeing people empowered, that people are coming to the table, negotiating their self-interest and doing the work around that. So I don't know if we're necessarily organizing people, but we're definitely getting people mobilized for power. But in terms of people being brought into the movement, whatever the movement is, and figuring out what their space is, I do think that it starts with your why. Why are you there? And I think it is going through the process of negotiating your self-interest with the self-interest of the group. And we just don't create space for that. In the movements, we don't do it. We just kind of, someone's pissed off, we need to do this thing, let's organize a march, and we do a march, and then that's just it. That we're not organizing, we're not building power. I don't see us really building power right now. I see us reacting to things, and I think it's hard to do anything other than, like when Troy came down to one of the marches, and we had been talking about putting his body in place, and they were asking all the white people to move to the front of the line because they knew that the police wouldn't do anything to white bodies. And so I think that tactically that we could do things where you can figure out your place, but in terms of authentically, like, what is the role of males in a female movement, or what's the role of white folk in a BIPOC movement? I don't think that we're doing that work. I don't think we're doing the relational work to get there.
What is the work to get there?
I think it's coming in truly with your self-interest and negotiating from that position, and not waiting for a flashpoint, but we're sitting at the table building the relationships when we don't need to go into a fight, and seeing what's really in the room. We don't do that. We posture. We have the Victim Olympics. We pit minority groups against other minority groups. And so what's the issue? Because it feels like progressives are the ones kind of setting the agenda. So if it's immigrants this year and it's Asians next year and it's blacks next year and it's poor white. So again, it feels like the people who are marginalized are being used in the movement to get the money, to get the attention, to do whatever power wants to do in the first place. It doesn't feel like it's coming up from the people. So it feels funky to me. Like,
talking to my son-in-law, this is what he says. It's about power.
yes.
It's about power. Who's got the power, and are you being used for the power, right?
Yes.
Because it's progressive. It doesn't mean that we don't have power
At all. Right.
Yeah,
Right. It's-
Power's getting played here. Increasingly suspicious of like the cause of whatever is alive in the field. That's where everybody's energy goes. It's so interesting to talk to people who are doing the work on the ground, and it's not in the paper. It's not a big deal. And that's what I think it is. It's not the cause of the month or the cause of the year. It is just plugging away. It's finding something that's in your heart and staying with it and plugging away. And it's just little by little.
So I have an invitation for you, Daniel. I've heard you give benedictions before. I wonder if there's anything coming up for you around that in terms of what we've been talking about tonight.
Where we have found safety, not bravery, but where we have found safety, whether it's in our own heads, our hearts, or our bodies, the invitation to leave that place and to go to a place that you've never seen. The faith, the hope, and the love required for yourself and for those who you encounter on the way. I think it's essential to what it is that's stirring in all of our hearts and our minds and our bodies. I know that I can't move from my head or my body to my heart without you. I won't do it. I can't. And so if I want to be the change, if I want to see the change, then I'm going to have to open up as an 8 and be vulnerable to the gift that you are, with all of your scars and all of your wounds and all the messiness, and invite you to lead me from my safe place to a place I've never been. I want to encourage all of us to tap into whatever faith, hope, or love that we have and not let that go.
Thanks for listening. Check the show notes for more information about the Hive, Leslie, and Daniel. Also, Daniel is launching the Future Changemakers movement in 2024 with a 6-week virtual real-time cohort, yearly subscription, weekly group and one-on-one coaching, and a DIY self-paced module. Their mission is to unite a diverse group of changemakers, including those who are just beginning their journey and those at pivotal choice points, to take on intentional leadership in the midst of complexity and uncertainty. Their passion is equipping, supporting, and organizing their people to be paid, promoted, recognized, and valued as themselves, confident and compensated in their professional lives. Lastly, if you'd like to join this live podcast experience, either in person at the Hive or on Zoom, we'd love to have you. You can find the registration link in the show notes. This episode was produced by me, Joey Taylor, and the music is from Jeff Gorman.